When I collapsed at work, the doctors called my son. He never came. But my daughter-in-law posted a family photo. Finally, a day without the drama queen. So I made one call and sold something they thought was theirs. Who's dramatic now? If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor buzzed like angry insects as I scrolled through social media from my gurney. Heart palpitations, the doctor had said. Stress-induced. At 63, apparently my body had decided it was done pretending everything was fine. The notification popped up on my phone just as a nurse checked my IV. Melissa had tagged me in a photo. How thoughtful of my daughter-in-law to remember me during my medical emergency. I tapped the screen, expecting maybe a get well message. Instead, I found a perfectly staged family dinner photo. David, my son, grinning at the head of my old dining table. Melissa, radiant in the chair I used to occupy. 12-year-old Chloe, my granddaughter, laughing at something off camera. They were in my house. Well, technically their house now, enjoying what looked like an elaborate homemade meal. The caption made my chest tighten worse than any heart palpitation. Finally, a day without the drama queen. Family dinner is so much more peaceful. Blessed. Family, shoe drama-free. 47 likes already. My sister-in-law Nancy had even commented with laugh-crying emojis. I stared at that phone screen for a full minute, letting the reality sink in. While I was lying in an emergency room, alone, they were celebrating my absence. Not worried, not concerned, celebrating. The nurse returned with discharge papers. Your son is coming to pick you up, right? I looked at the timestamp on Melissa's post. 20 minutes ago, right around when the hospital would have called David. He knew exactly where I was. He'd chosen the family dinner instead. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, I'll call a taxi. As I waited in the hospital lobby, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I called my real estate agent. Barbara, it's Eleanor Hartwell. Remember that house on Maple Street you said would sell in a week? I'm ready to list it. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this mess. 3 years ago, I thought I was being the perfect mother. Turns out, I was actually being the perfect fool. Like most stories about family betrayal, it started with good intentions and ended with me learning exactly what I was worth to the people I'd loved most. It began right after Tom's funeral. My husband of 35 years had left me the house, his life insurance, and enough savings to live comfortably. I was 60, recently widowed, and suddenly very alone in a 4-bedroom house that felt cavernous without his laughter filling the rooms. David had been so attentive during those first weeks. He'd stop by daily, sometimes with Melissa and Chloe, bringing groceries and checking on me. I thought it was grief bringing us closer together. Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house all by yourself, he'd said one evening as we sat on the front porch. It's not healthy. Melissa nodded sympathetically. All those memories everywhere. It must be so hard. I'd appreciated their concern. The house did feel overwhelming some days. What if, David continued, we moved in here temporarily, just until you decide what you want to do long term? Chloe could have the stability of staying in her school district, and you wouldn't be alone. The idea seemed perfect. I'd downsize to a small apartment nearby, let them take care of the house, and still have my family close. It would just be temporary, Melissa assured me, until we can save enough for our own place, maybe a year at most. I should have suspected something when David immediately started talking about property taxes and maintenance costs. How the house was such a financial burden for me on a fixed income. Never mind that Tom's insurance and investments meant I was hardly struggling financially. Within 6 months, they'd moved in completely. I'd rented a 1-bedroom apartment across town, paying monthly rent while they lived mortgage-free in the house Tom and I had spent decades paying off. But here's what I didn't know then. They'd been planning this from the start. While I grieved, they'd been systematically redirecting my mail to their new address to help manage my affairs. Bank statements, credit card offers, investment notices, everything started going to my old house where they could screen what I saw. Just temporarily. Became 2 years. Then 3. Every time I mentioned them moving out, there was a new crisis. David's job was unstable. Melissa was pregnant. False alarm, but they'd already planned for a nursery. Chloe was struggling with middle school transitions. I started to feel like an intruder in my own former home. Visits became awkward. My belongings disappeared into storage or donation piles. They updated the decor, painting over wallpaper Tom and I had chosen together. But the worst part wasn't losing the house. It was becoming invisible in my own family's life. Barbara Henderson answered on the first ring. At 70, she'd been selling houses longer than most real estate agents had been alive, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. Eleanor, I was wondering when you'd come to your senses about that property. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I want it listed immediately. How immediately are we talking? Because that house will have offers within days, but we need proper preparation. I thought about Melissa's social media post, probably getting more likes by the minute. How fast can you get the paperwork ready? Barbara laughed, the sound sharp with approval. That's the Eleanor I remember from the PTA fundraising wars. But honey, even with rush processing, we're looking at standard disclosure periods, 30 days minimum for closing, assuming cash buyers. Reality hit me. This wasn't going to be the dramatic same-day eviction I'd fantasized about. But maybe that was better. Better meant more thorough. Fine. But Barbara, I need complete discretion until we're ready to list, and I need to understand my legal position. Smart woman. I'll bring my attorney friend Patricia Morgan. She specializes in family property disputes. The next morning, Barbara arrived at my small apartment with Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who radiated competence. Eleanor, Patricia began, spreading documents across my tiny kitchen table. Before we proceed, I need to understand the living arrangement. Was there any formal lease agreement? Any documented rent payments? No, it was just family helping family. Patricia exchanged a look with Barbara. That's both good and bad news. Good, because you retain full ownership rights. Bad, because they might try to claim tenant protections or even adverse possession after 3 years of continuous occupancy. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. What does that mean? It means we need to be very careful about how we handle the eviction process. And Eleanor, you need to know, they will likely try to fight this legally. Barbara pulled out a thick folder. There's something else we need to discuss. I did some preliminary research on your property. The tax records show several liens were filed and released in the past 18 months. Did you know about those? I stared at her. What kind of liens? Home improvement loans primarily, all properly documented and paid off, but it suggests significant borrowing against the property's equity. The room started spinning. I never authorized any home improvement loans. Patricia leaned forward. Eleanor, when did you last check your credit report? I don't remember. Maybe 2 years ago? We need to pull your credit report immediately. If they've been intercepting your mail, there could be financial activity you're unaware of. As Patricia made calls to credit monitoring services, I sat in my kitchen, realizing how naive I'd been. While I thought I was being a generous mother, they'd been systematically positioning themselves to take everything. Eleanor, Patricia said, hanging up her phone. We need to meet again tomorrow. There are several accounts showing activity at your old address that require immediate investigation. Barbara packed up her papers. Honey, I think selling the house might be the least of your problems. The phone started ringing at 7:23 a.m. David's name flashed on the screen with the persistence of a smoke alarm. I let it go to voicemail while I made my morning coffee. The good stuff I'd bought myself for the first time in months. The kind that didn't require justifying the expense to anyone. The voicemail was everything I expected. Mom, we need to talk. There's some crazy woman calling about listing the house. Obviously, there's been a mistake. Call me back immediately. Obviously, there's been a mistake. As if the very idea of me making a decision without consulting him first was impossible to comprehend. The phone rang again before I'd finished listening to his message. This time it was Melissa. I answered on the 4th ring. Good morning, Melissa. Eleanor, what the hell is going on? Some real estate agent called David saying she's our listing agent now? This has to be some kind of scam. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. Actually, Barbara Henderson is my listing agent. She's been in business for 30 years, so I'd hardly call her a scammer. Your listing agent? Melissa's voice climbed an octave. What are you talking about? You don't own the house anymore. We've been living here for 3 years. Living there, yes. Owning it, no. The deed is still in my name, Melissa. It always has been. More silence, but this one had a different quality. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her brain. But But we've been maintaining it. We've put money into improvements. We painted the whole upstairs. With paint I paid for, I reminded her, along with the new washing machine, the roof repair, and every utility bill for the past 3 years. David's voice came through the speaker. Apparently I was on speakerphone now. Mom, this is insane. You can't just sell our home out from under us. Our home. That phrase hit like a physical slap. It stopped being our home when you started celebrating my absence on social media. What are you talking about? Melissa's voice again, but I could hear the guilt underneath the confusion. Finally, a day without the drama queen. Ring any bells? Posted while I was in the emergency room yesterday. By the way, but don't worry, I saw the photo. You all looked very happy to be rid of me. The line went quiet. In the background, I could hear Chloe asking someone to help her find her math homework. When David finally spoke, his voice had lost its indignant edge. Mom, that post wasn't about you. Of course it wasn't. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. Just like all those times you've been too busy to return my calls weren't about me either. Just like forgetting my birthday last month wasn't about me. We didn't forget your birthday. You wished me happy birthday on Facebook, 2 days late, which is about the level of effort I've come to expect. But here's what really bothered me. Patricia's credit report findings from yesterday were far worse than I'd let on. While they'd been playing house with my property, they'd also been playing bank with my identity. David, I said carefully, we need to have a very serious conversation about finances, in person, today. His voice became wary. What kind of conversation? The kind where you explain the $75,000 home equity loan taken out in my name 6 months ago. After hanging up on David and Melissa, I did something I should have done years ago. I started making a list. Not a grocery list or a to-do list, but an accounting. Every dismissed phone call, every canceled dinner plan, every time I'd been made to feel like an inconvenience in their perfectly curated family life. The notebook filled up faster than I expected. February 2024, asked David to help move furniture in my apartment. He said he was busy with work, but posted photos from a weekend ski trip the same day. January 2024, invited to Chloe's school play. Melissa forgot to save me a seat. I stood in the back while strangers sat in empty chairs. December 2023, Christmas morning at their house. I brought gifts for everyone. They gave me a scented candle from the drugstore clearance rack. Still had the markdown sticker on it. But it was the things I found online that really opened my eyes. While going through 3 years of social media posts, something I'd never bothered to do before, I discovered a pattern that made my stomach turn. Melissa's Instagram was like a highlight reel of family happiness. Hundreds of photos of David and Chloe. Family vacations I'd never heard about. Dinner parties I'd never been invited to. Birthday celebrations where I was conspicuously absent. But the comments were what really got to me. Under a photo of them at some restaurant. "Where's David's mom?" asked a family friend. Melissa's response, "Oh, she's not really a social person anymore. Prefers to stay home." Under a Christmas morning photo, "Lovely family. Just the 3 of you?" Melissa again, "David's mother is going through some things. We're giving her space to figure herself out." Going through some things? Figuring myself out? Like I was having some kind of breakdown instead of just being systematically excluded from their lives. But the worst one was under a photo from Chloe's 12th birthday party last month. A party I'd known nothing about until I saw the pictures online. Someone asked, "Did Grandma Eleanor make it?" David had responded this time, "Mom's gotten really demanding lately about attention and involvement. We decided it was better to keep things small and stress-free for Chloe's sake." Demanding. About attention and involvement in my granddaughter's birthday party. I stared at that comment for a full 10 minutes, letting the words rearrange everything I thought I knew about the past 3 years. They hadn't been protecting me from an empty house. They'd been protecting themselves from me. I wasn't the grieving widow who needed space and support. I was the inconvenient obligation they had to manage. Every dismissed invitation I'd blamed on my own neediness. Every awkward family gathering where I felt out of place. That wasn't in my head. They'd been actively working to make me feel unwelcome in my own family. But Patricia's findings from the credit report were still haunting me. The home equity loan was just the beginning. There were credit cards I'd never opened, personal loans I'd never signed for, and purchase patterns that painted a picture of people living far beyond any means I was providing them. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, can we please talk about this reasonably? We're family. Family doesn't sell houses out from under each other." I typed back, "You're absolutely right. Family doesn't." Then I blocked his number and called Patricia to discuss filing criminal charges. The revelation that shattered everything came at 2:47 a.m. when I couldn't sleep and decided to follow Patricia's advice about monitoring my financial accounts online. What I found made the heart palpitations from 2 days ago feel like a gentle flutter. The home equity loan was $75,000, not the small improvement loan I'd been imagining. But that was nothing compared to the rest. 3 credit cards I'd never opened, each with limits between $15,000 and $20,000. A personal loan for $30,000 that I definitely hadn't signed for. Store cards, gas cards, even a jewelry store credit account. All of them showing my address as the house on Maple Street. All of them current and in good standing, with payments being made from an account linked to that address. An account I'd never opened. The phone number listed on every single account was David's cell phone. With shaking hands, I pulled up the detailed statements I could access online. The charges painted a picture of a lifestyle I'd unknowingly been funding for over 18 months. Melissa's yoga studio membership, $200 monthly. David's gym and personal trainer, $350 monthly. Chloe's private tennis lessons, $400 monthly, lessons she'd never mentioned taking. Restaurants I'd never heard of, thousands of dollars monthly. Designer clothing purchases, spa treatments, weekend getaways. And then I found the vacation charges from December 2023. $8,000 to a resort in Mexico, charged while I'd spent Christmas alone because they were keeping things low-key that year. But it was the most recent charge that made me physically sick. A jewelry store purchase for $3,200 made the day I was in the hospital, while I was lying on a gurney with chest pains. David had been buying jewelry. The paper trail showed they'd been systematically stealing my identity for 18 months, but the mail redirection had been going on for 3 years, since right after Tom's funeral, when they'd helped me by having important documents sent to their address so I wouldn't be overwhelmed by paperwork while grieving. Every bank statement, every credit card offer, every financial communication had been intercepted and screened. They'd been curating what I saw while living off fraudulent accounts opened in my name. I printed everything, every statement, every charge, every forged signature that somehow passed for mine. By 5 a.m., I had a folder thick enough to choke a horse, all documenting how my son and daughter-in-law had been systematically stealing from me while making me feel grateful for their attention. But there was something else in the credit report that made my blood run cold. Inquiries. Multiple inquiries from attorneys' offices, financial institutions, and something called Elder Care Assessment Services. They hadn't just been stealing from me. They'd been building a case. Barbara arrived at 8 a.m. sharp with coffee and Patricia Morgan. "Eleanor," Barbara said, taking one look at my face, "what did you find?" I handed Patricia the folder. "Apparently, I've been funding their lifestyle for 18 months without knowing it. But there's more." Patricia flipped through the documents with the efficiency of someone who'd seen this before. Identity theft, credit fraud, forgery. "Eleanor, this is criminal. But these inquiry patterns suggest something else entirely." "What kind of something else?" "They've been consulting with elder law attorneys and financial advisors. This looks like preparation for a conservatorship case." The room started spinning. "They were planning to have me declared incompetent?" The timeline suggests yes. The mail redirection, the financial fraud, the social isolation. It's a textbook pattern for financial elder abuse leading to guardianship proceedings. Barbara nodded grimly. "The house sale just became a lot more urgent, honey. But even more urgent is filing criminal charges. If we don't move fast, they might accelerate their timeline." My phone had been buzzing all morning. David calling from different numbers since I'd blocked him. Melissa texting increasingly frantic messages. But I wasn't their victim anymore. And I definitely wasn't their meal ticket. I looked at both women. "How fast can we get the house listed and get criminal charges filed?" Patricia smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "How does today sound for the charges and tomorrow for the listing?" They escalated faster than I expected. By noon, Chloe was standing at my apartment door, tears streaming down her face, holding a suitcase. "Grandma Eleanor, please don't make us homeless. Mom says we'll have to live in our car." My heart shattered. Using my 12-year-old granddaughter as an emotional weapon was a new low, even for them. "Sweetheart, come inside." I guided her to my small couch, noting how her parents had stayed in the car, close enough to coach her, far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. "They sent you here alone?" I asked gently. Chloe nodded, fresh tears spilling. "Mom packed my bag and said I should stay with you since you're making us move out. She said maybe if I talked to you, you'd remember that family is supposed to take care of each other." The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost insulting. Almost. "Chloe, honey, did your parents explain why I'm selling the house?" She shook her head. "They just said you changed your mind about letting us live there, that you don't want us to be happy anymore." I sat down beside her, choosing my words carefully. "Do you remember 3 years ago when Grandpa Tom died and your family moved into our house? Yeah, to take care of it while you figured out what you wanted to do. That's right. It was supposed to be temporary. But what if I told you that in all this time, your parents never once looked for their own place? Never saved money to move out? Instead, they've been using my name to borrow money for things like vacations and expensive purchases that you never got to enjoy?" Chloe's face scrunched in confusion. "But Dad said we couldn't afford our own house because his job doesn't pay enough. Then maybe they shouldn't have spent $8,000 on a trip to Mexico last Christmas." Her eyes widened. "We didn't go to Mexico." My blood ran cold. "What did you do for Christmas, sweetheart?" "I stayed with my friend Sarah's family for a week. Mom and Dad said they had to go help sick relatives, but they couldn't take me because I might catch something. They'd abandoned their 12-year-old daughter with friends while they vacationed in Mexico on stolen money. These weren't just thieves. They were neglectful parents." A car horn honked outside. David signaled that the performance should be wrapping up. "Chloe, you're not going to be homeless. I promise you that. But I can't let your parents keep using my name to borrow money for things that don't benefit you at all." "They're using your name?" Her voice was very small. "I'm afraid so, but that's not your fault. And I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." The car horn honked again, more insistently. I walked Chloe downstairs, holding her small hand in mine. David rolled down the window as we approached. "Well, did you talk sense into her, Chloe?" I leaned down to window level. "David, if you ever use your daughter as a manipulation tool against me again, I'll add child endangerment to the criminal charges I filed this morning." His face went white. "What criminal charges?" "Identity theft, credit fraud, forgery, the $108,000 you've stolen from me over the past 18 months using fraudulent accounts." Melissa leaned across from the passenger seat. "We haven't stolen anything. That money went to household expenses and family needs." "Family needs?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Like the tennis lessons Chloe doesn't take, the vacation Chloe didn't go on, the jewelry you bought while I was in the hospital." "You're being dramatic," Melissa snapped. "This is what family does. They support each other." "You're absolutely right," I said. "That's exactly what family does. They support each other. They don't abandon each other in hospitals. They don't celebrate each other's absence. And they definitely don't steal each other's identities to fund luxury lifestyles while abandoning their own daughter at Christmas." I opened the car's back door. "Chloe, you're coming with me. Your parents need to figure out how to be actual adults before they're fit to take care of anyone." 3 weeks later, Patricia Morgan's office felt like a war room. Legal documents covered every surface, and she'd assembled what looked like a small army of associates to handle the multiple cases we were now pursuing. "The good news," she said, adjusting her reading glasses, "is that your son and daughter-in-law left a paper trail that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. The bad news is that this level of systematic fraud suggests they've been planning this for much longer than we initially thought." I was sitting across from her with Chloe, who'd insisted on coming to understand what her parents had done. At 12, she was handling the truth better than her father had at 38. "The pattern goes back almost 4 years, Patricia continued. "The mail redirection started immediately after your husband's funeral, ostensibly to help you manage paperwork while grieving. The fraudulent accounts began 18 months ago, but the groundwork was laid much earlier. The calculation of it made my stomach turn. They'd used my grief as cover for a long-term theft operation. There's something else, Patricia added, sliding a document across the desk. I had my investigator do some digging into their history. This isn't their first time pulling something like this. The background check revealed a pattern that explained so much. Before moving in with me, David and Melissa had lived with his elderly Aunt Margaret for 2 years. She died unexpectedly at 84, leaving her house to a church instead of to David. After her death, the church's attorneys found significant financial irregularities in Margaret's accounts, money that had disappeared in the months before her death. They never proved anything conclusively, Patricia explained. Margaret had been showing early signs of dementia, so the family decided not to pursue criminal charges. But the pattern is unmistakable. Chloe looked up from the coloring book I'd brought her. Is that why we moved in with you so fast after Grandpa died? Because they couldn't live with Aunt Margaret anymore? Smart kid. Too smart for her own good, but smart enough to see patterns the adults had missed. I think so, sweetheart. But here's what's most concerning, Patricia continued. The inquiry pattern on your credit report shows they were preparing for the next phase. Multiple consultations with elder law attorneys specializing in guardianship proceedings. They were building a case to have you declared incompetent. My phone rang. Nancy, my sister-in-law, returning a call I'd made earlier. Eleanor, I was so relieved to hear from you. I've been worried sick ever since I heard about the criminal charges. Is it true what David's been telling people? What has David been telling people? Nancy's voice became uncomfortable. He's saying you've had some kind of breakdown, that you're making false accusations against him and Melissa out of grief and confusion. He says you've become paranoid, and that's why they were trying to help you get professional care. There it was, the narrative they'd been preparing. Any accusations I made would be dismissed as the confused ramblings of a grieving, possibly incompetent widow. Nancy, I need you to know that everything I've discovered is documented and verified. Bank records, forged signatures, fraudulent accounts. This isn't confusion or grief. This is criminal financial abuse. I believe you, honey. And Eleanor, I'm sorry I didn't speak up before when I noticed things that seemed wrong. What kind of things? The way they talked about you at family gatherings. How they made you seem like a burden they were heroically managing. How they intercepted calls meant for you, saying you were too fragile to handle family business. After hanging up, I looked at Patricia. They've been preparing this narrative for months, haven't they? Classic pattern. Isolate the victim. Control the narrative. Then swoop in as the concerned family members who need legal authority to protect someone who's clearly become incompetent. She handed me another document. Emergency custody hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. Given the evidence of child abandonment and financial crimes, I'm confident we'll get temporary custody of Chloe. I looked at my granddaughter, who was listening to everything with the serious expression of someone much older than 12. Grandma Eleanor, she said quietly, I don't want to go back there. Not until they stop lying about everything. 6 weeks after filing charges, the house sale finally closed. Barbara had found cash buyers who paid asking price after a brief bidding war. Apparently, houses with motivated sellers moved fast when priced correctly. Standing in the empty living room for the last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. This house held 35 years of memories with Tom, but the past 3 years had tainted those memories with manipulation and theft. Chloe wandered through the empty rooms, running her fingers along walls where her height had been marked at different ages. It's weird seeing it empty, she said. Everything looks different without furniture and lies filling it up, I replied, which made her smile despite herself. The buyers, a young couple with twin toddlers, had been charmed by the house's family history and solid construction. They had no idea they were buying evidence in multiple felony cases. Barbara handed me the cashier's check with a satisfied smile. $400,000, minus closing costs. Not bad for a motivated sale. It felt surreal, holding a check that represented my freedom. Not just financial freedom, but freedom from the web of manipulation that had trapped me for 3 years. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from Patricia. The district attorney's office was treating this as a significant elder abuse case, partly because the dollar amount was so high, and partly because the systematic nature of the fraud suggested a pattern that might extend to other victims. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. The detective assigned to my case had discovered something troubling in David and Melissa's financial records. "Mrs. Hartwell," Detective Rodriguez had called to explain, "we found evidence that your son and daughter-in-law were researching your husband's death extensively. Medical records, insurance payouts, estate documentation. They were mapping your entire financial situation within weeks of the funeral." The calculation was chilling. While I was grieving, they'd been planning. "There's something else. We found draft documents on their home computer, a conservatorship petition dated 8 months ago. They were planning to file it next month, right around the time you would have been most isolated and appeared most confused to outside observers." "What stopped them?" "You did. By fighting back, instead of accepting their narrative, you disrupted their timeline. Now, instead of looking like a concerned family seeking help for an incompetent relative, they look like criminals caught in the act." That evening, Chloe and I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset and eating takeout Chinese food, something that would have required a family committee discussion in her parents' house. "Grandma Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Are my parents going to jail?" I considered how to answer honestly without traumatizing her further. "They're going to face consequences for what they did. What kind of consequences depends partly on whether they take responsibility or keep lying about it." She nodded solemnly. "I hope they learn something from this." "Me too, honey. Me too." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Melissa. We need to talk. There are things about this situation you don't understand." I showed the text to Chloe, who read it and rolled her eyes with the world weariness of someone who'd heard too many manipulative explanations in her short life. "Are you going to call her back?" "What do you think I should do?" Chloe thought for a moment. "I think people who steal money and lie about it don't get to demand conversations." 12 years old, and already wiser than her parents. The revelation that changed everything came from the most unexpected source: Jennifer Wells, Melissa's estranged sister from Seattle. She called me on a Tuesday evening, 3 months after the criminal charges were filed. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jennifer, Melissa's sister. Please don't hang up. I saw the news articles about the charges, and I need to tell you something important." I'd met Jennifer maybe twice in all the years David and Melissa had been together. She lived in Seattle and wasn't close to her family, but there was an urgency in her voice that made me listen. "What is it, Jennifer?" "I called Melissa last week, trying to understand what had happened. I thought maybe there was some misunderstanding, some way this could all be resolved within the family." I braced myself for another guilt trip or plea for mercy. "But Mrs. Hartwell, during that conversation, Melissa said things that made me realize this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. She told me details about their plan that I don't think she meant to share." My blood went cold. "What kind of plan?" Jennifer's voice was shaking now. She was angry, not thinking clearly, and she said something about how you'd forced their hand by fighting back, that they'd been planning to wait longer before starting the guardianship process, but your dramatic behavior had made them move too quickly. She admitted to planning guardianship proceedings? More than that. She said they'd been consulting with attorneys for months about how to document your supposed mental decline. She mentioned having recordings of you sounding confused during phone calls, photos of you looking disheveled at family events, testimony from neighbors about your erratic behavior. The systematic nature of it made me feel physically sick. "Jennifer, why are you telling me this?" There was a long pause. "Because 15 years ago, Melissa did something very similar to our grandmother." My heart stopped. Grandma Rose was 82, living independently, completely sharp mentally. But she had money, about $200,000 in savings plus her house. Melissa moved in to help her after a minor fall. Within a year, Grandma was in a nursing home with dementia, and Melissa had power of attorney over everything. What happened to the money? Gone. All of it. Melissa claimed it went to medical expenses and care costs, but the numbers never added up. When Grandma died 2 years later, there was nothing left. The family was too grief-stricken and guilty to investigate thoroughly. Jennifer's voice broke. "I should have warned you years ago. I should have said something when I heard David had married her. But I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just a coincidence." "Jennifer, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about your grandmother's situation?" "Absolutely. And Mrs. Hartwell? There's something else. I kept some of Grandma's papers after she died. financial records that didn't make sense at the time. I think they might be relevant to your case. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about a predator who'd found the perfect hunting ground. Elderly family members who trusted their relatives and didn't expect to be systematically destroyed by the people who claimed to love them. I called Patricia immediately. "Patricia, we need to expand the investigation. This isn't David and Melissa's first victim." The case that I'd thought was about family betrayal and financial theft had just become something much darker, a pattern of elder abuse that had destroyed at least 2 lives and was only stopped by accident when I fought back instead of accepting my assigned role as victim. Some battles you fight for money, others you fight for justice. But some battles you fight because if you don't, other people will suffer the same fate. This had become all 3. 18 months later, I'm sitting on the deck of my new house in Asheville, North Carolina, watching my granddaughter build a treehouse with my neighbor's grandson. The criminal proceedings finally concluded last month. David pled guilty to identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse in exchange for 2 years in prison and full restitution of $127,000, the total amount stolen once investigators traced all the fraudulent accounts. Melissa received 18 months and community service after her attorney argued she was following David's lead, though Jennifer's testimony about their grandmother's case made that argument less convincing. The investigation that started with my case eventually led to charges in Aunt Margaret's situation as well. Her estate was able to recover nearly $80,000 that had been transferred to David and Melissa's accounts in the months before her death. Justice delayed, but not denied. The restitution process took over a year, requiring the sale of luxury items they'd purchased with stolen money, garnishment of David's wages from prison work programs, and a lien against any property they might acquire in the future. I recovered about 60% of what was stolen, which Patricia said was better than average for these types of cases. But the most satisfying aspect wasn't financial. It was watching their carefully constructed narrative crumble under scrutiny. Every person they'd convinced I was becoming incompetent had to confront the reality that I'd successfully navigated complex legal proceedings, real estate transactions, and criminal prosecutions. You don't do those things if your faculties are impaired. Chloe lives with me now permanently. The custody hearing revealed that David and Melissa had left her with friends or relatives for extended periods on at least 6 occasions, including the Mexico vacation and several weekend trips funded by fraudulent credit cards. The judge was not impressed with parents who prioritized luxury vacations over their child's inclusion in family activities. She's thriving here. New school, new friends, and most importantly, adults who don't lie to her or use her as a manipulation tool against other family members. She's in therapy, we both are, learning how to have honest relationships after surviving systematic deception. The house Tom's life insurance bought us has 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and enough land for Chloe to have the childhood she deserves. She's made friends whose parents actually enjoy having me around, which was a revelation after years of being treated like an unwelcome obligation. I volunteer at the Regional Elder Abuse Prevention Center now, helping other people recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation. It's heartbreaking how common these stories are, and how often the abusers are family members who exploit trust and love for financial gain. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything turned out, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is simple. I regret that it took me 3 years to recognize what was happening. I regret that I enabled their behavior by accepting the temporary arrangement instead of setting clear boundaries from the beginning. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to accept their narrative that I was dramatic, demanding, or incompetent. I don't regret protecting my granddaughter from parents who were more invested in funding their lifestyle than caring for their child. What I have now is something I'd forgotten was possible. Peace without apology. Real peace, not the fake kind that comes from avoiding conflict at any cost, but the deep satisfaction of knowing I refused to be anyone's victim. David calls occasionally from prison, usually when he wants something, money for commissary, help with his appeals process, or intervention with Chloe, who rarely accepts his calls. I keep these conversations short and civil, but I don't pretend we have the relationship we used to have. Some trust, once broken by systematic betrayal and theft, can't be fully repaired. As I finish writing this, Chloe calls me over to see her treehouse progress. She's hammered a sign over the entrance that reads, "Eleanor and Chloe's Clubhouse, no drama queens allowed." Smart kid. She learned early that the people who call you dramatic are usually the ones creating all the drama. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.